All right, we know that there's a lot going on when it comes to not only what's happening, obviously, in the Middle East, but how it's being discussed in America, how it's being discussed by protesters on the streets, how it's being discussed in institutions of higher education, and I'd really like to know how teachers in Washington State are discussing it with their kids, because I'm sorry, but there is a track record of a lot of activism in our public schools. And so God only knows what kind of conversations are happening when it comes to Palestine, Israel, and the rhetoric that has been happening, certainly in politics in the U.S. And so it was interesting. We got an email from Senator John Braun. He's the Republican leader in the Senate, and his office had reached out and said, hey, we're crafting a bill right now that would actually improve the way the Holocaust is taught in our public schools, but would also look at teaching kids about the history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine. So perhaps they will be more informed about it and less susceptible to believe some of these extreme narratives about it. So we invited Senator John Braun on the show to talk about this effort. Senator Braun, welcome back to Undivided.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're already working on stuff for the session, one would hope. But this particular proposal that you're crafting right now has to do with K through 12 education and really trying to deal with some of the rising anti-Semitism that we're seeing through helping kids better understand history. So just talk first about the genesis of why you feel like this is necessary.
But I think it's pretty clear from what we've seen over the last few weeks that we're not getting through. People are not understanding that 7 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. That's a staggering number. I don't think people get that. The idea that they can say, well, or try to put it in context. You can't put something like that in context. You have to take it for what it is, and you have to do everything you can to make sure we don't do that sort of thing again. And I think I got concerns. I think many have concerns that we are headed in the wrong direction. So again, one of the things we can do is to give our children a better understanding through our K-12 education system of what happened and how it happened, and therefore hope for prevent it from happening or something like that from happening in the future.
Yeah, how do you, as you go about trying to craft a bill that would reflect what you think should be happening at K through 12 schools, how do you begin to craft something that I guess would do a better job? I mean, who are you consulting to determine what the curriculum is now versus what improvements could be made?
So it started basically a few weeks ago with an idea. Understanding what's the curriculum right now, where is it not been effective, and who do we talk to get a better understanding? So there's a whole bunch of folks from Jewish organizations and associations here in the state of Washington to national organizations to the General Council for Israel in the West. There's a lot of folks, as you might imagine, who are thinking about this. That we see not a rise in anti-Semitism, not just in our state, but across the country and to a certain extent around the world. So there are, good people have thought about this. So we're reaching out to literally anybody that wants to look at our idea and give us constructive feedback. I don't think we're there yet. I mean, because we want, but that's why we're starting. We got a little bit of time before session. We want to get as much input as we can, make a common sense bill that will make a real difference in getting the type of education I believe that our children need and deserve, having to do with Holocaust.
Yeah, and frankly, even if this bill, regardless of what happens to the bill, I think this is probably a pretty good time in history to reevaluate how we're teaching the Holocaust to kids in general and the current curriculum that exists, and constantly be looking at ways to improve it. So that kind of teaches you, obviously the horrors that Jewish people have suffered through history. But when we talk about the current conflict and what's going on, do you believe that 70 years of conflict between Israel and Palestine is something that ought to be taught to kids in grade school?
I want to be clear. This is a curriculum for K through 12, so I'm not sure all of this fits into grade school. I mean, there's some very graphic things that I think we need to be careful about. But yeah, I think that folks understanding how we got to the situation we are, understanding the facts because there's a lot of, indoctrination in some parts of our education system that I don't think are based on the facts. How did the state of Israel come to exist? What has been the source of conflict over all these years, and how can it be resolved? I mean, the idea put forth often by folks who are showing up to protest it that we need to eliminate the state of Israel. That's, of course, in my view, wrong-headed. But it's also, the idea that they can say that and say, and I don't doubt some of them are saying in good faith, but say it and not believe, that leads to further conflict, to further destruction, to further violence, is just, short-sighted. We have gotten to this point in our world where we sort of have one standard for the state of Israel and one standard for everyone else, and that's not right. We have to get down to the facts, get down to the real history. And I think if we do that, and I want to be clear, there's good and bad in that history. We should teach all of it. If we're gonna learn from it, we got to teach all of it. But the notion that we're somehow going to solve the problem by simply eliminating the state of Israel is just is wrong-headed, and I'd say morally wrong, but also very dangerous.
Yeah, and I tend to think, just my opinion, that 80% of the people who've been out there protesting this pro-Hamas message probably could not point to Jerusalem on a map or articulate any of the history whatsoever. That's just my personal opinion. But, and I also want to clarify, I didn't mean to suggest that we should be teaching these kids to elementary schoolers or middle schoolers, but I think the conversation around what are high schoolers equipped to deal with. But one of my other concerns when we talk about something like this, so clearly this has become politicized. Clearly, this has become something that activists have globbed onto. So how do you prevent that activism from seeping into how this conflict would be taught in high schools?
Yeah, I think that you're latched on to, I think, one of the key challenges we have is you go to all this effort and to get, to provide the facts, the basis, the resources, the professional training for teachers. And then if you end up with an activist teacher, do they teach something different regardless of what the input is? I think that's a real concern and one we're going to have to wrestle with. I'm not going to sit here and claim I have the answer to that, but we are aware of that challenge. That is something we have to fight back on, and we have to, and it's true certainly in this area where we're focused on right now, but it's true across the board in our teaching system is we got to get back to the fundamentals of education. Stop trying to have teachers impart their bias on children. Let's teach them not what to think, but how to think, as they say. And I think if we do that, we'll have a much better outcome.
Yeah, it's tough. And I see both sides of this. It's one of the things that would lead me to be a little concerned about this bill, because if they're not already teaching the history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine in our high schools, and then you insert that into it right now, no doubt you're going to have teachers who want to teach it their own way. And now this presents an opportunity for them to do so. So I'll be interested to see what you guys come up with. Do you think that this is something you could get some bipartisan support on?
I'm hopeful. I mean, I know there are folks on both sides of the aisle who are deeply concerned about the growth in anti-Semitism in our state, and I think they're genuine in that concern. And whether this is the right answer, we have a couple other legislative ideas we're working on. One is simply to define anti-Semitism. There's a very robust international definition. I think Washington could benefit by adopting that definition. So that's another idea that's out there, maybe a little less controversial, a little straightforward. Start with the basics. And the other thing we're working on, and this is not necessarily related to education, was the idea of we've seen some very disturbing, threats of violence against Jewish schools and associations. Can we offer assistance from the state to make sure that they're well protected, that we don't have folks living in a dangerous situation? So we're looking at a number of different things to get after the broader problem, and we're open to other ideas. I mean, this book isn't closed. I think the most important thing we can do right now is to try to reach a common understanding and to your point, hopefully a bipartisan understanding of the threat and the risk to not just to the state of Israel, but to our society if we let this continue.
Well, I'm sure Bob Ferguson will be reaching out to you about his extremism commission, right? To look into acts of anti-Semitism, not just right-wing extremism, or no?
Well, I haven't heard from Bob yet on this issue, so we'll see. My mind's certainly open, but I'm not waiting.
Yeah, do me a favor. Don't hold your breath. All right, Senator John Braun, we appreciate your time.
All right.
Yeah, so I definitely have some, whenever you put something this controversial in the hands of teachers, a lot of those teachers will do a good job. The vast majority of teachers, I think, are following the curriculum and they're not inserting their personal political bias into anything that's happening. But there are a lot who are, and especially given the toxic nature of this thing, how do you regulate that? How do you keep teachers from crossing the line? That's what I'd be really curious about.